Rutgers, I think there was like 11 people there. And I just had this frustration with like knowing that it could be this really great thing and that American cheese was, you know, on its way up. But I guess there weren't that many of us that knew that at the time. Or if there were, they didn't know about the American Cheese Society. So somewhat out of frustration and somewhat, I guess, out of vision, I just was like, okay, we got to get this going.
Ari Weinzweig came to me and he said, look, Garrett, this organization is going kaput. At that point, the American Cheese Society was teeny tiny and it was declining rather than growing. Just before that year, Frank Kozakowski had become ill. He was sorely missed. And the people who were left weren't really organizationally that excited by it, and they didn't understand that the population, which was really essential, were the cheesemakers. We immediately understood that it was the cheesemakers and the retailers and the distributors and the importers who were the key to the growth.
The more recent conferences have been a lot more fun than they were in the early days. In the early days, they were a little dour. We were a little bit apologetic about our products, and we had to listen to a lot of criticism of them. And, you know, we really struggled to try to learn how to make the products that we wanted to make. And we just didn't have the expertise. We didn't have the kinds of people who come to our conferences today back then. It was a little bit of the blind leading the blind.
The cheeses that we made at that time were, they kind of looked like hockey pucks. They were round and small and very hard and tasteless, tasted sort of like cardboard. And I decided to attend the 1990 conference in New York City. And it was so exciting, and I thought everyone knew so much, and I knew nothing. And I thought, this is my source. This is where I'm going to really learn how to make an amazing cheese. And really, I really credit the American Cheese Society for the success of our business and for the development of that little hockey puck.
I guess one story I remember is just getting up at the conference in San Francisco to welcome everybody with the American single, you know, and saying that today this is what people think of as American cheese, but then when we go out 20 years, that will be over and people will think of American cheese as American cheese. And I can't say that we've won the whole country over, but it's pretty clear that the image of American cheese is completely changed.
In Madison, Wisconsin is when I got involved in the competition, and I really enjoyed it. I had a little bit of staff, my wife, and we had, fortunately, Wisconsin judges who really knew what they were doing before I completely knew what I was up to. By expanding categories and by having the competition every year, we have given more opportunity for spotlights to hit the American cheesemaker and more opportunities for them to make more cheeses, to get more recognition, but also to have more craft and more tradition created in the American Cheese Society cheese-making population. That's what the competition's about. It's not like bragging rights. It's, I'm making a better cheese because I've got some information here. And that goes right back to the original intention of Frank and Dick. And I'd like to think that I'm just helping along the thing they started.
There was a little bit of financial trouble. We had had an absolutely wonderful conference in Vermont and wonderful digs. It was a great place. However, not quite enough people showed up to pay the bills. We put together a very good executive team, including Rhoda Stern and Bill McKenna and Ricky Carroll, and we were able to, within a year, turn the situation around, in part because of my getting down on my knees and pleading with the members to give us money. And I must say, in large measure because of Reggie Heiss and Andrea Nye in the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board, who really saved the Cheese Society's skin, and people need to know that they really, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for what they did at that time. Dr. Kozakowski, who started the society, of course, said that we should be careful when we reach the point where we start staying in fancy places, because that means we have to turn to the brokers and the people like me, the marketers, to help support the society, and we have to be careful not to allow that to let us lose what our focus is, which is cheesemakers and making better cheese. We rewrote the bylaws to make sure that the board always had a majority of cheesemakers so that those interests would be covered. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of that we did when I was there.
It was really, I believe, the goat cheesemakers who started to make more rinded cheeses. Mary Keene and Judy Shad had gone to Europe together, and they visited some cheesemakers, and they came back and started experimenting with putting penicillin rind on their cheese, and that was a big event, and people were just sort of gathering around. That was a monumental conference.
I initially got involved with ACS when it was in Green Bay. They asked me to judge, and that's when I decided to join the society. I'd have to guess we probably had about 50 or 60 cheeses that we were looking at compared to the 1,200 that we had this year.